Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. Glad to have you with us. Last night I made Grandma's peach pie, and I call it Grandma's peach pie because I made it with canned peaches, and you can make it with your home canned peaches. Grandma had peach trees, but the season was short, and she would can a bunch of them. So that's what we had for peach pie. So here are the ingredients. They'll also be in the info section. And hey, we'd love it if you'd give us a thumbs up and subscribe and click on the little bell icon at the top right so you'll get a notice when I post new videos about twice a week. Now let's get cooking. So we're going to use a half cup of lard, and you can see how I measure it. You put a cup of water in and you fill it up until the amount reaches 1.5 cups, and so you have a half cup of lard and 1 stick of unsalted butter. You can use salted, just add less salt. I was given some lovely lard, rendered leaf fat, by a company called The Naked Pig, and I had to use it in a pie crust to test it because, pie crusts are a good test of lard. If you want a crispy crust, flaky, you really need to use some lard. You can make pie crust with all butter, or you can make it with all lard. The lard makes it crispy, the butter gives it a good flavor, and so I used half and half. If I'm making a pie crust for a cream pie, I generally just go with butter. So I've cut these up in about 1/2-inch pieces, and I'm going to cut the lard up. And when I get this chopped up, I'm going to stick it in the freezer, because to make a good pie crust, you want to have very cold fat. Now, a lot of people also refrigerate their flour. I don't do that, but I do use ice water, and as we go along, you'll see that I use ice water to help keep the temperature down low. So now this is going to go into the freezer to chill in about a half an hour at least. 20 minutes to a half an hour. You want to leave it in the freezer, and then I'll come back. So I have measured 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour into my trusty food processor, and then 1 teaspoonful of salt. And no, Grandma didn't use a food processor. She had a little pastry cutter, and she mixed it together with that. But this is so much easier. I use the food processor now almost always when I'm making a pie crust. So the flour and the salt are in, and then I'm going to put the fat in, the butter and the lard. And little note, you should drain the lard well before you put it in here, because it stuck to my bowl when it froze. But I did manage to get it out and get it all in there. Now what we're going to do is cut the butter and lard, the fat, into the flour and salt, and we're going to mix it enough that it pretty much obliterates the fat. I know a lot of people say cut it into pea-sized balls. I pretty much just beat it up really well. I'm going for the texture of cornmeal, and that generally takes about 10 to 15 seconds, and I pulse the whole time. So I'm going to show you, after about 10 seconds, I checked it, and I still have some little pea-sized balls in here. And I'll show you what I mean. You just run your fingers through it, and if you feel little lumps of fat like that, mix it just about 5 more seconds. And you can mix it longer without messing up the texture, because we haven't added the water yet. So beating the flour and the fat together is not going to develop gluten. Except I had a couple drops of water, but that won't be enough to make any difference. So I'm just going to beat it a little bit more, or blend it a little bit more, until we've gotten rid of all of the little, excuse my bruise, you know my dogs play rough, until we make sure there's no more lumps of fat. And that's one of the wonderful things about using a food processor for this. You can really work it well without introducing the heat of your hands. So now I'm going to add the ice water, and I just pour it in slowly. And when I see it all come together, I will stop blending. And I actually put just a drop or two too much in this. It didn't hurt anything, but you could put a little bit less. I should have stopped it maybe 2 seconds before I did. I used the whole cup of water, and according to the weather, you may use much less. Just kind of gauge it by the texture you see in the blender. Then I'm going to turn this out onto my board here. You can see there's still just a tiny little bit of flour that didn't get mixed in. I'm not going to add any flour to my board here. You can if you need to, but generally you don't want to work a whole lot more flour into it. Now all I'm going to do now is form it into a ball, and then I'm going to put it in a bowl and cover it. And I'm going to chill this. Notice now I'm not kneading it. I'm just kind of smoothing it up and making it into a ball. And I'll cover it. You can cover it with plastic wrap. You don't even need a bowl. You can just wrap it up into some plastic wrap. And I'm going to chill that for about 30 minutes. And it just makes it work better and helps it stay cool to increase the flakiness when you're done. You know, the flakiness comes from the tiny, tiny little pieces of fat that are trapped in the flour, and they melt when you start cooking. So while the crust is chilling, I'm going to drain my peaches. I've used 3 15-ounce cans of peaches in their own juice, no syrup. If your peaches were canned in syrup, you probably won't add any sugar. Now I've reserved half cup of that juice to make a roux, and I have put 2 tablespoons full of butter in this enameled cast iron pan. You want to use a kind of a heavy bottom pan. And I'm going to make a roux, 2 tablespoons full of butter, 2 tablespoons full of cornstarch. This step is optional. You can put the peaches in with no roux, with no thickening, and they'll be just fine. I like to have a little thickening in mine. Well, I added my half cup of peach juice in, but I didn't get it on the camera. And then I'm going to add my half cup of brown sugar. This is Splenda brown sugar. You can add any sweetener you like, about a half cup, if your peaches were not canned in a syrup. If your peaches were canned in sugar, don't add any more. I'm eyeballing my spices here. I put about a half teaspoonful of cinnamon and a 1/4 teaspoonful of nutmeg. I also sometimes put just a pinch of cloves in. I really like that with peaches. But that's not on the ingredient list, and it's optional. Then I'm going to add an 1/8 teaspoonful of salt. And I always add salt to sweet dishes like this because it makes them taste sweeter. Salt lets the sugar come through better. So I'm just going to mix this up. You notice I'm keeping this on a low heat. I don't want it to scorch. And then when I get it mixed together well, I'm going to fold the peaches, the drained peaches, in. I'm just going to pour them in. These are some pretty peaches. And when I mix those together well, I'm just going to turn the heat off because I don't want these to be really hot when I put them in the pie shell. So I'll just let those simmer just a minute, then turn them off, and then we'll come back and finish our pie. Now before you start this step, turn your oven on to 375 and let it be preheating because this doesn't take very long. So I put just a little flour down on my board, and I have this nice Silpat board that's measured off in circles of different sizes. My pie plate is 9 inches, the one I'm going to use. I'm going to cut this dough, this pie dough, just a tiny bit bigger on one side than the other, and I'll use the bigger part for the bottom crust and the smaller part for the top. And this dough, I'm going to tell you as I'm working it, it's a little moister. You see I've got that measured. I need to go out that far to have enough to make it deep dish, or to go into the dish. But it's not going to make any difference. Your dough may be just a little bit stiffer, and that's fine. I'm going to sort of form it into a ball and then start rolling it. And you probably already know how to roll a pie crust, but I'm going to show you how I roll mine. and just make it into a ball. And it's very chilled, so a little bit of warmth from my hands is not going to hurt it. And then I'll get out my rolling pin and flour it too, just a little bit. I don't use a lot of flour in this process. That's just my preference. You can use a little bit more. And then I roll it. And when I'm rolling a pie crust to start with, I roll it in only one direction. And I'll roll it out about the size that I want the finished product to be. And of course, you know, it'll shrink back. It'll pull back. So I've rolled it one way, and then I lift it. Make sure there's some flour underneath it, and roll it in the other direction. Now, I'll just continue to do this until it gets to the size I want. Couple things to watch for when you're rolling a pie crust. People tend to roll more in the center than the outside, and you'll end up with a thick outer rim and a thin center. So just be aware of that while you're rolling. If you bear down on one side, one part more than the other, bear down on the outside. And I only do 2 or 3 rolls before I flip it, because that way it won't stick. And if yours is sticking, just add more flour. So we're almost there. Let me turn this, my camera kind of moves. And roll it out until you get it to the size you want. And with these proportions, it ought to be at about the right thickness. And once you get it out about as big as you want, you can then start moving your rolling pin in different directions to shape it into a circle. Shouldn't have to do too much of that. You can add more flour anytime you need it. See, we're just about there. And this dough is going to be sturdy. It's not going to be falling apart as you handle it. It'll stay together really nicely. And you're better flipping it more often than not. And there you go. We're about there. Just making it more into a circle and making sure that the ridges, the edges, are not real thick. About there. And notice that this is not flimsy. This is pretty easy to handle. So into my pie plate, and a little trick here is when you first put it into your pie plate, lift it up and push it in. If you have any pressure, any stress pulling it at all, then it might bubble up in the middle while you're cooking, and you'll have this great big bump right there in the middle. When you've made sure there's no tension on it at all and it's not pulling, then just go around the edge there and kind of press that down. It'll kind of adhere to the pie plate a little bit. You see, I'll push it in, push it in, push it in. And we're gonna, and I always dock mine with a fork, just tiny little holes, and that's gonna help it stay flat too. I have had them just rise up in the middle like a volcano. I'll do the top crust and be right back. So my top crust is ready. I didn't think you wanted to watch that rolling again. It's just the same procedure. My peaches have cooled, and I'm going to ladle them in to the bottom crust. And I waited to put the peaches in until after the top crust was rolled out so that I can work pretty quickly. I want things to still be fairly cool. I want the crust to still have a little chill on it. And if you'll see those 3, they were 15-ounce cans, but pints would work fine, or a quart and a pint if you've put up your own. And then we're going to move that out of the way and I'll get the crust ready. And I just roll it up on my rolling pin, just to sort of control it as I put it on the top. Having a little trouble here because I'm always kind of crowded. So I'll pull this over, and you can see I've got quite a bit of overhang there, and I did that on purpose. I roll it that way on purpose because I use that extra to make a pretty scallop. Now I dot mine with a couple of little pieces of butter right on top, and then I'll put this crust on top and square it up. And it's really pretty easy to do if you've rolled it on your rolling pin. My peaches are not very cool. They still have a little steam coming off of them. And I'm going to kind of line the top and the bottom up. And again, you want to make sure you're not pulling it, that there's no stress on it, no stretch. So again, I'm pushing it in, pushing it in. And then I'm going to trim away the excess. Now I leave a little bit here. I'll just try to show you about how much I leave because I really like to make a pretty deep scallop, and so I leave enough crust to do that. And it would be so much better if I had a turntable. Someday I'm going to get one. And I'm going to take the time to show you how to make a pretty scallop. So the first thing is go around and fold it under and kind of pinch it up. You see I'm sort of building up a rim there. And if you get to a point where you have too much crust, cut a little bit of it away. And I've only trimmed half the pie, sort of trim it as I go. But fold it under and pinch it up. Like that. Trim some more. And I'll use all this leftover pie crust, by the way. It makes a great couple of little turnovers. You know, just roll it out and put some preserves in it and brush them with an egg wash and bake them for about 25 minutes. They're beautiful. They're wonderful turnovers. Anyway, I've just about gone all the way around here. I've got it standing up, and I just pinch it all the way around, make it kind of even, flatten it out. And now we can make our scallop. And the way I do that is use either 2 knuckles or 2 fingers. I usually use my knuckle because my nails are a little bit long. And then you push the other finger in between them. And you've seen this scallop done before. It just works out better if you do that step of making everything stand up. And just go all around the pie using the same movement. The other thing you can do is you've probably got some utensils in your kitchen that's got a nice hole in the end, like a spatula or a whisk or something, and you can just take that and go all the way around and make an impression with that, and it makes a pretty scallop. I've done that with my whisk has a wire end, and I just use it. But this is my go-to, and there you go. And that usually bakes up looking pretty nice. Now we're going to score it, make vent holes, and I generally just cut right through the crust, and I generally mark them in my suggested slice size. That often doesn't work, but it's a suggestion. And you have to do that because the peaches are going to steam, and you want that steam to escape. So I've beat up 1 whole egg with a tablespoonful of water, and I mean I really beat it. I beat it till it was foamy. And then we're going to brush this on as evenly as you can all over the pie. The purpose of using the whole egg instead of the egg white, which you normally use for an egg wash, is the yolk helps the crust to brown. And be sure to beat it well. I made a pie last week and I didn't beat the egg well enough, and it looked like brown streaks all over the crust. So beat the egg well, and don't let it puddle up. If you have puddles, we'll get those out. But anywhere you have that egg, if you let it puddle up or be thicker, it's going to make a dark streak on your pie, which won't do anything for the flavor. But you know, we went to a lot of trouble here to make it pretty, so let's don't mess it up with the egg wash. So all over, and if in spite of all your efforts you have little puddles, just wick them up with a paper towel. And there you go. We're going to put this in the oven and set the timer for 45 minutes at 375. I will check it at 35 minutes to make sure that my crust is not browning too much. It doesn't usually at a 45-minute time, but if it does, I'll add some aluminum foil to the edges. And after 45 minutes, this is what we've got. I'm going to put it on a rack and let it cool. So I've let it cool about 20 minutes, and I probably should have let it cool more, like an hour, but dinner's over and I'm going to eat it. So I'm going to cut it, and you want to cut, make sure you cut with this thick scallop. You want to really be careful about making sure that you cut all the way through that scallop on both sides, or it'll tear it totally up when you pull it out. And I'm not the best at this anyway, so, and this is a big thick pie, so some of those peaches are going to come out anyway. But I managed to get a slice. Let me move this around so I can show it to you. And yes, if I'd waited a little longer, that cornstarch would have set up more. And there we go. There is a slice. And let me show you the crust. And you see how thin that crust is? I know when I was rolling it, you thought I had it really thick. But see the flakes in that? And that comes from the lard. And, you know, lard is really a healthy food. Yeah, I know you don't think so. But it really is. It's a healthy fat. It has a high smoke point. But we'll not talk about that now. Right now we're going to eat pie. And this is just full to overflowing with peaches. You could put less if you want to. I like it full, almost like a cobbler. And oh, the crust is crunchy and crispy. Hope you try this. Hope you like it. My grandma made a great peach pie. Hope to see you again tomorrow.